In honor of the movie coming out this year on Valentine's Day, I, as an avid lover of the Gothic, have decided to do a little bit of analysis, a little bit of a deep dive into the Wuthering Heights, so that hopefully I, as a viewer, and you, as a viewer, are better equipped at coming into this movie with a fresh pair of eyes so that we can understand the movie better and so that we can critique it a little bit better. Hopefully, the analysis of this text that I will provide here will enable us to come to better conclusions about the movie. The main source of research that I did for this video is from this book. This edition, it's the Penguin Classics, the cloth bound version, has two articles written in the beginning by Pauline Nestor and Lucasta Miller. So these are the articles that I'm going to be referencing in this video. So in lieu of the controversial marketing campaign that the movie launched a few months ago with the trailer and the teaser, it obviously sparked a lot of controversy and also a lot of conversation online about Wuthering Heights and what it really means as a novel. I saw a post a few months ago that specifically said it listed a bunch of things that the Wuthering Heights is supposedly about and what it's not about. And so the author of this post listed things like violence, domestic abuse, racial abuse, misogyny, cycles of violence, and mental illness as what the text is about. And in the column where they said what the text is not about, they put the word sex. And this is actually what inspired me to make this video, because I disagree with that. I understand the author's intention and frustrations, and I share a lot of them in regards to the movie being marketed as a bodice ripper, because that makes us think that the Wuthering Heights novel is a bodice ripper, which is decidedly not. It is not even a romance novel. But to simplify Wuthering Heights to just a novel about violence and to completely disregard the subject of sex within the novel is, I think, a too simple of an interpretation for a novel as layered and complex and uncomfortable as The Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is first and foremost a Gothic novel. It is about all of those things that I've mentioned and that the author of the post has mentioned, things like violence, cycles of violence, mental illness, racial abuse, the other, but it is also about sex. Deviant sexual transgressions are a huge part of a Gothic novel. Wuthering Heights specifically uses romance and sexual tension as a way to draw attention to the highly emotional, dark, and twisted and problematic relationships and people within the novel. It uses it as well to provide context for the blurring of the boundaries between people and between identities as well. The blurring of the socially acceptable boundaries within the relationships between two people as well as within the relationship within yourself. I'm just going to quickly offer a little bit of analysis of exactly what Gothic tropes Wuthering Heights uses. I've already previously talked about a bunch of Gothic tropes. I'm going to talk about them again. Wuthering Heights uses tropes like the doubles, which we can see repeatedly with characters like Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Linton, who later becomes Catherine Heathcliff. They are doubles of each other, the mother and the daughter. We see this with Hareton and Heathcliff as well. Also with Heathcliff's son, Linton Heathcliff, and Heathcliff himself. This is another really confusing thing. It's the names. The Heathcliff's son is very much this like effeminate boy, and Heathcliff is a super burly, strong man. Similarly to Hareton, who is actually closer to Heathcliff's natural son than his own actual natural son. Linton. Hareton is very much like Heathcliff in that he's this like burly farmhand, strong, like masculine figure who also is extremely physically abusive. We also see the trope of the supernatural appear in Wuthering Heights, where in the beginning, the ghost of the child, Catherine Earnshaw, knocks on the window of the room where our narrator is staying and begs to be let in. And that drives Heathcliff mad with yearning, where he opens the window wide and says, "Kathy, come in, come in." We also see the Gothic trope of the institution or a manor or a house, specifically with the Thrushcross Grange and with the Wuthering Heights itself, which symbolizes depression, repression, constraints, mental instability, and overall this kind of like ominous presence within these people's lives. Despite the fact that Wuthering Heights is not an overtly feminist novel, like for example Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights still has a lot of interesting things to say about gender, like what I mentioned with Linton Heathcliff, how he is this like effeminate, kind of delicate boy who is very weak and feminine, and with Catherine Linton, who is a very brave, strong, physically strong, and mentally strong woman. It reverses gender roles that way. Of course, my favorite topic, incest, is very much present as a subtext within the novel, but this time it's not only incest, it is also necrophilia. Incest and necrophilia are part of the psychosexual, weird Gothic transgressions that occur in the novel. I have covered incest within the 18th century Gothic novel as my first video on this channel, and I continue to be fascinated by the subject because there's so much source material. Despite the fact that Kathy and Heathcliff are not blood related, they are raised like brother and sister. This blurs the boundary of their relationship between a brother and sister to something more incest adjacent. The passion that they experience for each other and this very debatably erotic, debatably sexual nature of their relationship presents itself very incest-like. Heathcliff famously opens the lid of Catherine's coffin or grave the day that she's buried to do God knows what with a corpse he finds there. He also dreams about doing that again 18 years later after she's buried. Listen to this quote. "Disturbed her? No. She has disturbed me, night and day, through 18 years, incessantly, remorselessly, till yesternight, and yesternight I was tranquil. I dreamt I was sleeping the last sleep by that sleeper, with my heart stopped and my cheek frozen against hers." He dreams about being buried next to her. He dreams about just being with her dead body. None of this incest or necrophilia negates the passion that they feel for each other. This like obvious, intense sexual passion that Heathcliff and Catherine experience towards each other. Wuthering Heights uses the romance between Kathy and Heathcliff to draw attention to the intense blurring of the boundaries of the self and the identity that we would consider to be healthy in our society. Wuthering Heights portrays a relationship where Kathy passionately and famously declares, "I am Heathcliff," as a way to blur the boundaries of her own identity and become one with the other that is Heathcliff, to become inseparable from him, as if the boundaries between these two identities do not exist. This emotional and sexual intensity further provides context for this blurring of the boundaries as a sort of psychological subtext. Another way that the novel blurs boundaries between people and between themselves is through the names, like what I mentioned previously. all of the names being very similar to each other, like Catherine Earnshaw / Linton. And then later she gives birth to her daughter, who is also Catherine Linton, and then she becomes Catherine Heathcliff. Linton Heathcliff, who is Heathcliff's son. Heathcliff doesn't have a last name, so he's referred to as Heathcliff the entire time. And then Hareton Earnshaw, like the names are very similar, and it sort of further suggests this like borderline incestuous connection between these two families. The entire time we're talking about two families who are constantly marrying each other and having babies with each other. Another way we can see Wuthering Heights blurring the boundaries is through the way that it uses the narration of the novel. We as the reader and as the audience are very far removed from what is actually happening within the novel. We observe Lockwood, who's the narrator, observing Nellie, who is the housekeeper, observing the actual story piece of the novel. Obviously, Lockwood as just this visitor at Thrushcross Grange, and Nellie as the housekeeper of Wuthering Heights and then later Thrushcross Grange. Neither of them are particularly reliable narrators. We don't actually have the story of Wuthering Heights told by the characters and the direct participants in the story. We only hear about them. Not only do we hear just about them, we hear about them from another party that is observing that narration. So it is super far removed from us. We as the audience are kept at such a distance from the centerpiece of the novel to allow for the tension to build, emotional sexual tension, for us to realize that we're not privy to the inner worlds of these characters, maybe as much as we wish we were. For example, we never actually see Catherine and Heathcliff be together in the same room by themselves because we are observing Nellie. And there are multiple times within the novel where Nellie has left them alone in the room. And we can only guess as to what happens between the two of them when they are alone in that room, where Nellie is not there to watch what happens, and Nellie is not there to tell us what happened. While the text does not directly provide evidence of a sexual relationship being present between Heathcliff and Catherine, when I read Wuthering Heights, all I see on the page is yearning and sexual tension. That's not all I see, just FYI. That is a lot of what I see. I also see a lot of violence, domestic violence, racialized violence, misogyny, mental illness, but I also see yearning. This is not a scholarly video, obviously. This is for entertainment purposes. I feel free to speculate. I don't think it is very hard to guess what happened in those rooms, in those 15 minutes that they got to each other when they were by themselves. Wuthering Heights is also undoubtedly a novel about violence. Violence is something each character is privy to and goes through plenty of. Each character suffers some type of violence to various extents. Like I mentioned already, domestic abuse, racialized abuse, class-related abuse. That's just some of the physical violence that occurs in the novel. There's also plenty of mental abuse. I think the reason people get so uncomfortable about Wuthering Heights being portrayed as a romance is not because necessarily that's misunderstanding the book, which it would be misunderstanding the book if it was purely portrayed as a romance, but I think most of us get uncomfortable with that blurring of the lines between romance and sex and violence. But I just wanted to make this video to sort of respond to the general consensus that I've been seeing online that sex is something that Wuthering Heights should not be about, or Wuthering Heights adaptations should not even use. I think disregarding sex within the novel and disregarding sex as a means of analyzing the novel and therefore portraying it in the adaptation of the novel would be maybe too simple of an approach to analyze Wuthering Heights and therefore to adapt Wuthering Heights. Okay, that's all I had for the script, but as a side note, I'm very excited to see the movie. I am really hoping that it is not a bodice ripper. From what it looks like, the director of the movie is either a genius or she is completely misunderstanding Wuthering Heights. The reason that I say this are twofold. Number one, the casting of Heathcliff as Jacob Elordi is still to me quite problematic because Heathcliff in the novel is the other. He's very clearly racialized. His racial identity, not only is it tied to him and what he went through, it is also tied inextricably to the plot of Wuthering Heights as a novel. Casting a white person to play Heathcliff, I think, so far as, I haven't seen the movie yet, might be a mistake, but we will see. Another reason is leaning on the bodice ripper vibes. Like I said, Wuthering Heights is not a bodice ripper. It should not be adapted as such. But again, we will see. The reason I say that this movie might be genius is because the most gothic thing that the director can do is to shock the audience of this movie. Because in this day and age, where we are so used to seeing violence, not only in media, we see it on our screen every single day. We see violence, we are desensitized to violence. We've seen all there is to see in terms of violent media, right? Violent actions being filmed and posted online. There isn't really much else that can shock us. So for her to adapt Wuthering Heights, if it was adapted as exactly by the book, I'm not gonna lie, it would not be shocking at all. There isn't really much actually shocking to us, to the 21st century audience, that happens in Wuthering Heights, in my opinion. I read it when I was 16 years old. I was like very mildly shocked, and then I read it as a 27-year-old last year, and I was, let's just say, not shocked at all. I was mostly just curious and interested and invested and mesmerized, but I was not shocked. Wuthering Heights, when it came out, was a deeply, deeply shocking novel. People wanted to tame it. They wanted to censor it. Emily Bronte's own sister censored the novel, or rather not censored, but she edited it. Wuthering Heights was and still is a novel that contains that shock factor, but to translate it to the screen would take a lot. And from what I've read and from what I've seen, she's kind of doing that already. The reaction to the trailer alone, people are outraged, people are shocked. In my opinion, she's achieving the goal that she has set out for herself. That's what I'm interpreting, but we will see once the movie comes out. I really hope that it delivers. Okay, thanks for watching.